Hey, welcome back to the stash. What's one thing you just simply would not want to happen if you were Spider-Man? Perhaps you think of maybe one of your villains sleeping with your aunt, maybe your aunt sleeping with your number one hater's dad, maybe your aunt choosing to shoot you instead of letting you capture Doc. Oh, Jesus Christ, f you aren't, mate. But there's one thing that's proven within Spider-Man comics as the be-all, end-all, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, having your secret identity revealed. I mean, would you sacrifice your marriage to Mephisto all for some privacy and to save your old aunt? Jeez, why is this video turned into an Aunt May rant? Anyway, Spider-Man's identity has actually been revealed quite a few times over the decades, and during those blunders, he's managed to somehow get out of that sticky situation scot-free. All except one. Poor Daredevil probably wishes his own identity leaks were that easy to fix. But what I find interesting is that Civil War wasn't the first time Peter's let the cat out of the bag. Believe it or not, he did so in probably one of the most weirdest ways possible, all the way back in 1970. So join us today as we go over a classic, The Amazing Spider-Man comic, issue 87, Unmasked at Last. But before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to say that your support here at The Stash truly does mean the world to me, so if you're a fan of Spider-Man or just love comic content in general, consider sticking around and maybe hitting the subscribe button. Anyway, with all that being said, let's jump right back into the video. Our tale begins with the frantic Peter Parker desperately trying to figure out the cause of his problems. He's feeling weaker with each passing hour, his once God-gifted body now betraying him. Even as he takes a blood sample to check if the radiation in his blood is losing its effects, the world around him blurs. He must get help, but who could possibly aid Spider-Man without trying to unmask him? Peter ponders for a moment until he remembers that Dr. Kurt Connors, a man he's saved countless times, owes him a favor or two. He's the perfect person to help. He wouldn't ask him to unmask, especially after all they've been through. And so a weary Spider-Man tries to make his way to Kurt's place. The effects are getting worse though, with Spidey barely being able to cling onto a wall, and a sudden fear of heights coming into play, making it quite difficult to swing around the city he once used to use as his own personal playground. Upon arriving to Dr. Connor's office, he finds the entire place empty, much to his dismay. It seems he must have taken his family to Florida, which leaves Spider-Man all alone with a deep feeling of hopelessness surrounding the room. He slowly makes his way to the rooftop, contemplating what he must do, but then he suddenly remembers the importance of today. It's the night of Gwen Stacy's surprise birthday party. Spider-Man had been so wrapped up in his own problems, he had completely forgot the entire thing. He wouldn't dare miss it, yet he tells himself that he mustn't arrive empty-handed. He notices a jewelry store across the road, and in an act that goes against his very core, an act that would put to shame everything his Uncle Ben stood for, Spider-Man breaks into the shop and immediately something catches his eye. Peter stares at the pearls, the perfect gift for Gwen, and for a fleeting moment the thought crosses his mind, just this once. But then, a cold wave of realization hits. This isn't him. He can't be the kind of man who would steal, no matter the reason. Not after everything Uncle Ben taught him. Due to his inexplicable actions, Peter begins to wonder if his mind too is slowly deteriorating. And so before he leaves the scene, he places the pearls back, for he won't let all the good he's done be tarnished by ending it all as being nothing more than a crook. As Spider-Man goes out the window, everything begins to feel hazy, resulting in him plummeting towards the hard surface below. That sinks it. If he can't even be sure of his balance, then how could he possibly be sure about being Spider-Man? Thus Peter sits there, alone on the rooftop, reflecting on the cards fate has seemingly dealt him. Yet as he sits there, he knows that he still has to do something about Gwen Stacy's birthday. Speaking of Gwen, it's the night of her party, yet she can't keep her eyes peeled off the window. She hopes and prays for the sight of Peter Parker arriving, but the chance of such a thing begins to look bleaker and bleaker after each passing second, with Harry Osborn and Mary Jane only able to watch on hopelessly. Gwen soon tries to pick up the mood. After all, it is her birthday, so she dances the night away, fooling all but two, her dad and Harry. They both just know that although she sounds cheerful, her heart is longing for Peter. As the last group leaves, Gwen begins to break down, with her friends trying to comfort her the best they can. Then standing in the doorway, it's Peter Parker. The man's in a daze, holding his Spider-Man mask in front of all those he cares about. For he had to tell them. He couldn't keep it a secret any longer. Spider-Man is finished. His career has ended forever. Peter reveals to Gwen, Harry, MJ, and Captain Stacy as they all watch on in horror that he's the only one who could possibly know that because he is Spider-Man. The sheer shock of the news and the condition Peter's in is frightening everyone. George tries to be logical, but Gwen is on the verge of hysteria. As soon as Peter realizes what he's done to the girl he loves, he turns around and bolts out the door, leaving Gwen, Harry, MJ, and Captain Stacy all trying to make sense of what just happened. Harry brings up the time when Spider-Man battled Dr. Octopus, a battle in which Spidey lost and had been unmasked, yet they deemed him as just a nervy imposter. So what could possibly make him try it a second time, Harry wonders. Gwen brings up the question of, what if he really is Spider-Man? What if it wasn't all an act? Meanwhile, a few blocks away, an ill Peter Parker is staggering his way around town. He begins to wonder if the radioactivity in his blood has maybe fatally affected him. With this new concern arising, he simply cannot put it off any longer. He must go find medical help. He puts on his costume for any extra luck for the nurses and doctors to believe his symptoms. As he arrives, the nurse is frightened by the sight of Spider-Man, but he makes it clear he needs help fast. Lucky for Spidey, a certain Dr. Phillips is close by on the scene, a doctor who only cares about one thing, his illness. Phillips runs some test on the wall crawler and leaves him for a moment to rest, until finally, at last, the results are in. The cause behind all this chaos, all this mayhem is the flu. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Spider-Man has had the worst case of the flu in years. A case so bad that it puts an ingrown toenail to show. What's with Stanley and ingrown toenails?
He'll have an ingrown toenail.
Anyway, mere minutes later, Spider-Man is starting to pull off a miracle recovery and thanks the good doctor on his way out. Yet his jubilation is cut very short right after he remembers what he's just done at Gwen's party. He feels it all over, everything he's worked for. He's thrown it away over an illness, leaving the tormented Peter Parker to ponder his plight as the minutes turn to hours and the fading gloom of night gives way to the slowly gathering dawn. Thanks to his body continuing to recover, he's almost at full strength. But what good is it after what he's done? But then suddenly the answer is all clear in Peter's mind. Granted, it's a long shot, but it's still a chance. Plus, what does he really have to lose anymore? He puts on a makeshift disguise and rushes over to a certain someone who owes him a favor from their last encounter. That someone being Hobby Brown, the Prowler. Spider-Man quickly explains he needs him to wear his Spidey suit as well as the where and when, with no questions asked. Hobby knows he can't fail Spidey, especially after he didn't turn him in when he was caught as the Prowler and gave him the chance he needed, so he agrees to help. And so, later that night, a nervous Peter Parker slowly heads for the Stacy home. He goes in and tries his best to explain the entire situation. But then, at that very important moment, Spider-Man leaps through the window, thanking Peter for bringing him his costume. With Hobby pulling off this feat, it's safe to say that the secret identity of the Amazing Spider-Man is back to being unknown. Therefore, our story ends with Peter Parker, a man who tempted fate and somehow won, walking on home under the weight of a victory that feels as uncertain as the life he's chosen to lead. Issue 87 of The Amazing Spider-Man is a lot to unpack. With Stan Lee at the helm, it's no surprise that this issue is packed with frantic energy, intense emotions, and some downright outlandish moments that just work for the time. That's the beauty of Stan Lee's writing. He makes you feel every twist and turn, especially when Spider-Man's at his lowest. I love the way he depicts the complete fall of Spidey. Stan Lee's writing it puts you right on the edge with Peter. Whether he's fumbling through blurred research, almost becoming a crook, or finally revealing his identity, Stan the Man makes every moment feel like a roller coaster, intense, raw, and impossible to look away from. But I have to also mention the work of the great, late John Romita Sr. The art within this issue is fucking amazing. I just adore the way he's able to capture each scene's mood to perfection. The man is really the GOAT of Spidey artists. I mean, the impact he's had on the comics as a whole will forever be set in stone, and it's more than deserved. His artwork should be the staple. Well, I mean, it was back when the comics were good, but I feel like now Marvel just prefers to opt out for a more generic look to everything. It sucks. Like, fucking look at this. Look at this shit. Come on, what are we doing here?
Mega crap.
Anyway, if I had to pick one scene, one moment that was my standout or favorite, it would have to be the peak of Peter's breakdown. Seeing him completely throw away his identity only to run straight out the door after seeing the effects it was having on those around him was such a wacky yet oddly natural turn for the story to take. Maybe it's because I'm used to the Silver and early Bronze Age comic book writing style to the point where I can judge them as their own thing, but rereading this classic for the first time in ages was a blast and kept me on the edge of my seat, especially when Peter was so tempted to steal, to cross that line. There were so many brilliant moments within this issue that all accumulated to this end result that was overall a really fun read from a classic era of Spidey comics made by the iconic duo of Stan Lee and John Romita Sr., a duo which we cannot forget, for without them, and Steve Ditko of course, we really wouldn't be here today. They are the pioneers of this great character, and we all should be able to just pay respects for what they did. But man, if only future Peter was able to deal with his secret being out as well as he did here. God, imagine one more day set back then. Instead of giving up his marriage to Mephisto, he'd have to give up that dream motorcycle. Oh, the horror!
Flame on, flame